Okay, now we'll take a look at our Kit Kat. We can take a look at his or her. I have to go down there and look. Okay, so here's the thyroid cartilages. Okay, then you can see the rings. Here's the trachea coming down. Okay, and then that would come down, and there's various parts and pieces of lungs in here. These are the lungs. You don't have to worry about which lobe is which. Just be able to recognize that these are the lungs. Okay, and if you feel so inclined, you can get a straw and put it in there and blow and watch it go big, big. Or you can just go back there and push on the diaphragm. Fine. Also, they're telling you to look for that phrenic nerve again. So here's our diaphragm, right? See how tough that is? It's thin, but it's wicked tough. And that's going to seal off the chest from the abdomen. And you have these two nerves coming in. You have one here and one here. Those are the phrenic nerves. Remember those phrenic nerves? Come down here. Innervate, maybe we haven't talked about that. Anyway, innervate the diaphragm, because the diaphragm has to go up and down, so it has to have some sort of nerve innervation, right? You have to have nerves to it. Those are the phrenic nerves. A friend of mine actually had a mediastinum. The mediastinum is the space between the heart and the lungs. She had a tumor growing there, so they had to go in and take the tumor out, and they nicked one of her phrenic nerves, so half of her diaphragm is paralyzed. She huffs and puffs a lot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was pretty annoying. Okay, so there's the diaphragm. All right. If we come back up here and start looking at the digestive structures, again, right behind this trachea is this really flexible tube that hasn't really been prosected out terribly well. Right there. That tube right there, really flexible because it has to expand when the food comes, right? That's the esophagus. So we know the esophagus, and it's surrounded by muscles, right? Your esophagus is surrounded by muscles. Muscles that go this way and muscles that go around. And those squeeze in a rhythmic fashion to force the food down the esophagus. And it goes to the stomach, right? But to get to the stomach, we have to go through the diaphragm. So here's our esophagus coming through right there. You don't see that? There's the esophagus coming through. And it goes through a very specific point called the hiatus. Okay? So it goes through there, and then it's going to come out on the other side, right at the top of the stomach, right there. Okay? And sometimes, particularly in preemies, that hiatus will rip, and you get a hiatal hernia where you have intestinal contents coming up into the chest, and they have to go in there and seal that off because you have to maintain a sealed cavity. Because if you can't change pressure, you can't breathe, right? So when you inhale, right, your ribs come up, so your lungs expand, your diaphragm is pulled down, so that inside now you've increased volume, and pressure and volume are inverse, right? So you increase volume, you decrease pressure, air is going to come in. When you exhale, your ribs go back down, your diaphragm snaps back up, so now inside you've decreased volume, which means you've increased pressure inside, air comes out. So if I were to put a hole in your cavity right there, you can't change pressure, you would suffocate unless we plugged up the hole, right? All right, so on that cheery note, coming down here, so now we come through the diaphragm, so now we're at the stomach. This is called the fundus of the stomach, the top of the stomach, okay? And right where that esophagus meets the stomach is a sphincter. And we know what a sphincter is, right? Like a purse string of muscle, okay? And that's a really important sphincter because if that sphincter doesn't close, as soon as that food goes in, that sphincter closes. Because once the food is in the stomach, it's going to get mixed with the acid, right? Your stomach has glands in there or cells in there that produce hydrochloric acid. And if that sphincter doesn't work properly, then some of that acid chyme, it's called, is going to come back up onto the end of your esophagus. And it can erode your esophagus. Yep, that's GERD. Or even if it happens once in a while, that's heartburn. So this is sometimes called a cardiac sphincter. It's got nothing to do with your heart, but that's why they call it, because you have that heartburn feeling. Okay, so your stomach is not open. Let's open the stomach and see what we got in there.
Did we not think this was like my biggest fear today?
Inside the stomach, you have a lot of extra folds of tissue. That's going to allow that stomach to expand when it fills up, right? Those extra folds are called rugae. We may or may not be able to see them in this one because it feels like he's got a lot of cat chow in here.
Oh, God.
Well, we'll see.
We knew that was going to happen.
Yep, he's full of cat chow.
Oh, God. Oh.
See? It's cat chow.
Are you serious?
Oh, at least he died full.
Oh.
He died after a good meal.
Okay.
Okay?
I feel a little less bad about it.
We'll put that back there. Anyway, so this whole thing is the stomach, this sort of J-shaped organ right here. This is all stomach. So again, the top is the fundus. This is the greater curvature of the stomach. and then this part down here, the bottom of the J right here, that's called the pyloric region. So you get your food in there and you grind it all up and you mix it up with the acid and all that good slurpy stuff. And then now it's got a pH of about 2. And that doesn't affect your stomach because your stomach has glands in there that produce mucus. Right? So you have this big, thick mucus layer lining the inside of your stomach, which protects the stomach lining itself from the acid. And you routinely wear the mucus away and you produce new mucus, and it's usually not a problem unless you have a diet that's high in alcohol, salt, and or NSAID pain relievers. They wear the mucus down faster than you can rebuild it, and that can lead to an ulcer, right? When that stomach acid actually reaches the wall of the stomach. Okay? So, problem. So from the stomach, we're going to go to the small intestines. The small intestines does not have a protective mucus layer. So problem 1 is we got pH 2 going into an unprotected small intestines. So what do we do about that? We have another sphincter right here at the bottom of the pyloric region of the stomach, right where it meets the small intestines. That's the pyloric sphincter. And that's going to regulate flow from the stomach to the small intestines. And it actually just releases that acidy stuff one little spurt at a time. But as soon as that stuff is released, it has to be neutralized, so you're going to burn your small intestines. So a couple of things to do for that. First, let's back up here and take a look at this organ. This is
The liver.
the liver, right? And the liver is actually held up underneath that diaphragm by that piece right there. That's actually called the falciform ligament, and it just keeps the diaphragm, keeps the liver up under the diaphragm. And if we turn the liver over here a little bit, we should be able to see gallbladder, which is this structure right here. It's all deflated right now, but it's like a little balloon, right? So the liver makes the bile, which is a collection of salts that act as emulsifiers. They break up big globs of fat into tiny little droplets to make them easier to digest, okay? And that bile is going to come through this duct right here. This is called the cystic duct coming out of the gallbladder, and that's going to combine with these ducts coming in here. If I can pull this away, you have ducts coming in here from the liver itself. Those all combine into one big tube, which is right here. That's the common bile duct. What you also got on the other side that you can't see is another duct coming in from the pancreas. The exocrine function of the pancreas is to produce digestive enzymes, and it produces them in a very alkaline solution, a very basic solution. So you have enzymes coming in from the liver, you have bile coming in from the gallbladder, you have digestive enzymes coming in from the pancreas, all in a very basic solution. So as soon as that acid is put into the duodenum, it's neutralized immediately. Okay? So that first U-shaped piece of small intestines, the first couple of inches of small intestines, wow, he's really tangled up here.
He was digesting.
I guess. So here's my stomach, and this is the first part of the small intestines right there. So the first couple of inches of the small intestines is called the duodenum. The function of the duodenum is to complete chemical digestion. By the time the food reaches the end of the duodenum, chemical digestion is completed. It's broken down as much as it can be broken down. Okay? So from the duodenum, then we go into the real curly part of the intestines, all this stuff. This is called the jejunum. The function of the jejunum is to absorb all of those nutrients that we just broke down. You see all the blood flow there?
Yeah.
Right? The nutrients are absorbed directly from the intestines into that blood flow. It actually goes to the liver, and then it's sent out to the body. Okay, that's the mesentery. Okay? So we have all of the small intestines, and it's all curlicue like that because it increases surface area, so we can fit a lot of it in there. Then we go to the last part of the small intestines, if I can find it. The last part of the small intestines, the last couple of inches here, is called the ileum. The ileum connects the small intestines to the large intestine. This is the large intestine. You can see there's less of it, but it's much bigger diameter. Okay? And if you feel right where those two combine, right in this area right here, you feel this little P, this little bump. That's a valve. That's called the ileocecal valve. And that regulates flow from the ileum into the large intestines. Okay? And then you have this part right here, because here's the valve down here. This part right here, this nub, that's the cecum. We don't have that. We have an appendix, right? And if we were to put this in orientation like it is in us, this is where our appendix would be, right? Lower right quadrant. So this is our appendix in us. This would be the ascending, the transverse, and the descending colon for us, right? It's kind of like a box, okay? Where was I? Okay, so then all of the Material then moves from the small intestines. Presumably we've absorbed all the nutrients we can absorb. It goes into the large intestines. The function of the large intestine is to reclaim water, right? We are mostly water. We want to reclaim water. Also inhabiting your large intestines are a whole variety of bacteria. The bacteria feed on whatever organic material is left. A byproduct of their metabolism is vitamins, primarily vitamin D. That's where we get, not vitamin D, vitamin K. That's where we get a lot of our vitamin K from. That's important in blood clotting. Okay, so then we absorb all the water we can. We move down to the lower part. Just below the descending colon there is an enlargement called the rectum. The rectum is for storage and compaction of waste, and then finally elimination through the anus. Okay, this descending colon here, this part of the large intestines, you see how it's hooked to this membrane right here? That's called the mesocolon. And the function of the mesocolon is to hold it in that orientation, because you don't want it to be kinked like that, right? Then you get impacted, and that's a whole other set of problems. Okay, so that's called the mesocolon right there. Okay, and if we come back up here a little bit, this stuff right here, this nice fatty apron stuff right there, that's called the greater omentum. It's called the greater omentum because it is attached to the greater, or the big curve of the stomach. Okay, so this is greater omentum, all that stuff. And then on the smaller curve of the stomach, right in here, this goo, that's lesser omentum. Okay, not much of that, but a lot of this stuff.
What does that do? What is that?
It provides protection and cushioning over the viscera. If we move that out of the way, pull it up here, you can see this thing in yours, it's not too big. Actually, it's quite small in yours. This thing looks like a little piece of teriyaki. That's the spleen. That's not a digestive organ, but we're going to use that as a marker. Because if you pull that spleen back, and we look under here, what the heck is going on here? There we go. See this piece of tissue right here? So here's the spleen right here. Right under the spleen is this chunk right here. That's pancreas. The pancreas runs right along under the stomach, right over here, and all of this tissue right here under the duodenum, that's all pancreatic tissue. All of this is pancreas.
Wow.
Okay. Salivary glands. Going back up here. 3 sets of salivary glands. You look for the ear. Right below the ear, you'll feel this cushiony part right there. That's the largest of the salivary glands. That's the parotid gland. Sometimes you can see the duct. I don't see the duct, but there should be a duct that comes right across. This is the masseter muscle. Remember that? There's usually a duct that comes right across the face of the masseter muscle into the back of the mouth. That's the parotid duct, bringing the saliva in. Just below that parotid duct is this organ right there. That's the submandibular salivary gland. Again, that's going to bring the saliva into the back of the mouth. And then deep to that is a tiny little one called the sublingual. That's the one that's under your tongue. Okay, so parotid, submandibular, and then the sublingual is the little bitty one underneath. Okay.